Hey guys, in today's video, I want to discuss the Federer slice versus the Djokovic slice. And I'm talking about the one-handed backhand slice. And when it comes to the Federer slice technique, this is a technique that you will see from very few players. And when it comes to the Djokovic backhand slice technique, this is a technique that you will see from the vast majority of players on the ATP and the WTA Tour. And of course, I'm going to discuss which one of these slices is going to be easier to adapt at the recreational level. So before we get into the Federer slice versus the Djokovic slice, let's discuss the one-handed backhand slice in general. And there are a lot of myths regarding the one-handed backhand slice. So all slices, independent of the specific style, will have a high to low movement. That is how underspin is generated on the backhand slice. What all styles will also have in common is an across the body movement. So the fundamentals of the one-handed backhand slice technique are a high to low approach to the ball and an across the body movement after contact has been established. Now there are more fundamentals which we are not going to get into today. I've done other videos on the one-handed backhand slice. But it's important that we discuss the different scenarios that players will find themselves in and the style of slice that they execute in those specific scenarios. So generally, independent of the specific style that a player has, when players are slicing a high ball on the backhand, they will generally have a high to low movement of the racket with an across the body swing path. Generally, when players are slicing a low ball, they will not start as high. They will reduce the height of the take back, and they will execute a very similar movement, high to low, and then across. The reason why the take back is lower when the ball is lower is because, let's say that you're hitting a slice backhand below your waist, around the knee level or even lower, you don't need to start as high. It's enough to start somewhere around your chest area, and that's going to give you enough space to go down towards the ball. Of course, all players will sometimes chip their slice, which means that they will take the pace of the incoming ball and redirect it with underspin. What you will see on these type of slices is a very short finish. Now, when it comes to the Roger Federer slice technique, you will see Roger finishing in a few different ways. Sometimes he will stop the movement somewhere around here where the tip of the racket is pointing straight towards the ground, and sometimes the hand will go a little bit higher and the racket is still pointing towards the ground, but slightly more forward, and sometimes Roger will finish with the tip of the racket pointing straight towards the ground as the hand is going up across his body. And sometimes, especially when Roger is warming up, he will see that his racket will go even a little bit higher on this side. But when you examine the Roger Federer slice closely, you will start to understand why on the vast majority of the Federer slices, you will see that the tip of the racket is pointing towards the ground independent of the height of his hand. And the reason is that Roger Federer has quite a unique swing path on his slice. So when he makes contact with the ball, the racket goes way lower than it does on other players. So the racket will go below his knee area and will then go up on this side. And on some occasions, Federer will not even go up. He will go straight down and the racket will remain quite low on the finish. And now let's talk about the Djokovic slice. And this technique is the most commonly used on both the ATP and the WTA Tour. So the preparation is very similar to the Federer slice. Djokovic starts high. The contact is almost identical to the Federer slice. It's established very close to the front foot. Djokovic, just like Federer, will swing across his body, but when you take a look at the finish, you'll see that the racket tip is pointing across the net, so it's much higher than the Federer slice, and the hand will usually go way higher. This is what I call the U slice. So Djokovic will start with his right hand at the level of his left shoulder. He will go down and across, and he will finish with his right hand at the level of the right shoulder. And if you draw a line along the tip of the racket. This looks like the letter U. Now here's the interesting thing. The finish influences the contact. I've talked in many of my videos why intending a specific finish on a stroke can influence the actual contact and the swing pad shortly thereafter, because there is a delay between our intention and our execution. So by you intending to finish a certain way, you can influence your contact and what happens shortly thereafter. So in the case of the Djokovic slice, the finish is a very important indicator to what actually happens shortly after contact. So when Djokovic executes his swing path, it's very similar to the Federer slice in a sense where the racket goes across the body. But if you look closely, you will see that the racket shallows out. So again, the Federer slice goes across the body, but the racket goes much lower, and the Djokovic slice goes across the body, but the racket shallows out. So what does this mean regarding underspin? Federer gets a lot more underspin compared to Djokovic and most other players on the professional tours. Now logically you would think that this is a slice that you should adapt because it has more underspin. Well, here's where it becomes super tricky. When you try to execute the Federer slice, and the way you would do it, you would intend to keep the tip of the racket towards the ground as you go across the body. You will see that your trajectory is going to be very low, and that's a good thing if you can get the ball just slightly over the net. But what you will find is that you're going to start dumping a lot of slices into the net. So you will be comfortable if you're slicing a high ball to execute the Federer swing path, and most players do this type of swing path when the ball is higher. However, when the ball is lower and you try to get your racket to go straight down towards the ground, it's going to be very tricky to get the ball over the net. That's where the Djokovic slice is much easier, because the racket shallows out shortly after the moment of contact. As the racket is going across, you're going to have less issues getting that ball to go over the net. And yes, it is still possible to get a low trajectory. There's no doubt about it. You will get a tad less underspin, but you won't dump nearly as many balls into the net as you would if you try to execute the Federer slice technique. So my recommendation is that you utilize the U slice, where you start high, you go down towards the ball, and then you swing across in a U shape. Naturally, when you intend to finish with the tip of the racket pointing straight towards the other side, the strings parallel to the net, the hand at the level of your dominant shoulder, shortly after the moment of contact, you're going to intuitively shallow out that part, and it's going to be much easier for you to get underspin and also get the ball consistently over the net. If you're struggling with letting the slice float, and if it's sitting up too much, this does not have to do as much with your swing path, but rather the angle of your racket face at the moment of contact, which should be close to neutral.